Hey guys, FilthyRobot here, bringing another guides, tips, and tricks video. This time we're asking how good is the Plague Doctor? So, first things first, let's get this out of the way. Quick disclaimer, I'm approaching these guide videos from the perspective of playing on the hardest difficulties, of encountering the hardest challenges Darkest Dungeon has to throw at you, those being hard mode combined with low light. My thought is any strategies we talk about specific to the harder modes are also going to be applicable to the easier modes of play, and not vice versa. So let's approach it from the challenging set of positions first. Okay, that said, let's look at the Plague Doctor. Let's take a look at their basic stats. You can see that just below the webcam. You'll see HP 38. That is a little bit below average HP, dead average dodge, quite a bit faster than average speed, lowest crit in the game, average, a little bit below average damage, below average stun resist, above average blight resist, below average bleed resist, above average disease resist, below average move resist, above average debuff resist, about average trap disarm, and 1-1 moving, which is fairly slow. The chassis on the Plague Doctor isn't that great, quite honestly. Low HP isn't great. High speed is very nice. That is the kind of redeeming factor of the Plague Doctor's basic abilities. I don't like low bleed resist, although high blight is quite nice. I don't like low stun resist, and I don't like the movement. 1-1 is kind of bad. The Plague Doctor often is in problems if it's in position 1 or 2, and if you get stuck in position 1 and you get shuffled to position 1 and you can only move backwards 1 per round, it takes you 2 rounds before you get back to the positions the Plague Doctor prefers to be in, which kind of sucks. Plague Doctor is a damage dealer first, and a stunner second, and a healer third. It is a multi-classed, multi-rolled class rather. And the Plague Doctor prefers to be in position 3 or 4, about equal on those, maybe a slight preference to position 3. And in a pinch can go to position 2, but you need to be rearranging skills if you're going to do that. My preferred skills in the Plague Doctor are these skills here: Noxious Blast, Plague Grenade, Blinding Gas, and Battlefield Med. And let's talk through the skills. The skills, by the way, are really what make the Plague Doctor excel. The chassis itself, the base stats of the Plague Doctor aren't all that impressive, but the skills are really, really good. That said, Noxious Blast is mediocre. It is a high damage blight per tick. That has a minus 80% damage mod, which means it does almost no damage when you attack a target, which almost all the Plague Doctor's abilities are like this. So in general, all the Plague Doctor's abilities have a very high minus damage mod on them, which means you don't really care that much about damage on the Plague Doctor. So you don't care about the fact that the chassis has low base damage on it when you can instead, all the abilities don't really mind damage. You don't have to stack damage on a Plague Doctor. What you do need to stack on a Plague Doctor is blight percentage and stun percentage. And it just so happens that the Blasphemous Vial, one of the best items in the game, the Plague Doctor unique, I guess it's a legendary item, whatever the orange color is in this game, provides stun percentage, accuracy, and blight percentage, which is just incredible. That's what the Plague Doctor needs. All right, so Noxious Blast. It's a decent blight dot per turn. This is particularly excellent versus high protection targets or targets that take multiple actions per round, like bosses. But it's okay versus the rest of it. It only hits position 1, 2, which means it's not going to do what you need it to do in terms of killing the high priority targets. But it can be used for cleanup on the last rounds of a fight. In particular, it's good for ensuring that your opponents don't get an extra action on you. Let's say you have a position where your opponent, the remaining opponent on the board, is roughly as fast as your stress healer. Let's say you have a Crusader on the board, and you really would like to get that final round of Inspiring Cry, that final stress heal, and the opponent's at low health, but you're not sure who's going to go first, the Crusader or the opponent, and you don't want your opponent to get an action. This is a really nice time for Noxious Blast. You put a Noxious Blast on him. That means if the enemy acts, he'll die from the dot tick of Noxious Blast. But if the enemy doesn't act, the Crusader gets to go first. If the Crusader goes ahead, the Crusader can act, stress heal, then the enemy acts and dies. That's a pretty nice situation to be in. Additionally, dots interact with reinforcements in a very unique way, which is generally reinforcements will arrive after, if you're fighting an opponent who's size 2 or bigger, no reinforcements. If you're fighting 2 opponents at the same time, there's no reinforcements. If you're fighting Pelagic Guardian, there's no reinforcements. If you're fighting any single enemy of size 1 by himself, he can only be alive for 2 rounds, 2 complete rounds. At the end of the second complete round, he needs to die to not give you the stress of incoming reinforcements, except, and here's the part where dots come into play, except if he has a lethal dot on him. So it can be the end of the second round, and the enemy the enemy's at 3 health and he has a 5-point dot on him. That means you won't trigger the stress of reinforcements. And that means you can have, sometimes using dots, you can give yourself a third round to recover in, because the enemy is going to act later in that third round than some of your characters, which means a couple of your characters get to go, then the enemy's turn goes, he dot ticks and dies, and you didn't get those reinforcements. So dots can be used to extend the rounds that you can recover in, which is pretty cool. All right. Next up is Plague Grenade. Plague Grenade is an excellent ability. It is a fairly high damage blight per turn on high damage per round, not initial application, to the back 2 ranks simultaneously, which is great. This is a really strong ability to use at the opening of a fight. I get asked a lot, how come I don't blinding gas early, and mostly why do I Plague Grenade first? It's basically because if you do this right, you can... Plague Doctor's fairly fast. Most rounds he's going to act ahead of the enemies, but not always. But a lot of the rounds, pretty decent percentage of the chance. If you want to get that blight ticking on the back rank and then stun them. If you stun them first, then get the blight ticking, you've missed sometimes between at least 1, but often 2 rounds of blight tick. And then you put the stun resist buff on the enemies, which means the total number of rounds your enemies are going to get is going to be longer if you blinding gas first. There are some exceptions to when you want to do that, but in general, that's what you're looking for. I had one of my viewers say, Billy CCFC, said, which I thought was a great summation of what the Darkest Dungeon game is tactically. The goal is to give the overall number of high-value opponents the least number of rounds of action as possible. And basically, Plague Grenade first instead of blinding gas first is generally the course of action that gives the opponent the least number of rounds. Okay, and that's only, to be clear, the high value targets. The low value targets, you want to give them as many rounds as possible as you recover your stress and healing. All right, blinding gas is another excellent ability. It is a high percentage stun that stuns 2 targets. It's not as good as it looks on paper, honestly, because a lot of times you are focusing on killing position 3 very, very fast anyways within 1 round generally. But sometimes you will get a decent stun off with that, and it's okay. It's not a bad ability. Incision is fairly shit. This is the only ability the Plague Doctor has that is a melee ability, and it's the only ability the Plague Doctor has that actually cares about his damage mod, his actual damage ability, because it has no negative damage mod built into it. It's got a decent crit percentage. It is his only bleed ability. It doesn't have a super high bleed percentage, so it will be a bleed ability that often is resisted, and the amount of bleed it does isn't all that much. It only can attack position 1 and position 2, which is fairly bad, and it has high upfront damage, which is not something you want for position 1 and position 2. Why would you use this at all? You use this because sometimes you want to bring the Plague Doctor to one of the realms in which they are very resistant to blight, that being the Warrens or the Weald, where the enemies are fairly resistant to blight and you need bleed. Why do you bring the Plague Doctor to the Warrens or the Weald? Because maybe you want to bring the Plague Doctor on some of the boss fights where he's really good on, like the Flesh, and you need to have some abilities that will get you to the Flesh with as little stress and health lost as possible, and Incision might be one of those abilities that does that. Okay, next up is Battlefield Med. Battlefield Med is awesome. This is one of the best abilities in the game, in my opinion. It does 3 things. The first thing it does is it heals a target for a very small amount of health, but it is a non-zero amount of health, which means you can bring someone from Death's Door to off of Death's Door, which is in of itself an amazing ability. Second, it cures the bleed or blight on the target, which is also really good. Also for that scenario of when the target is on Death's Door and a bleed or a blight might kill them, or for the many scenarios in which case there are very, very high bleeds or blights, such as versus Shamblers, versus the Flesh, versus the final Darkest Dungeon 1 and Darkest Dungeon 2, where you're fighting the priests who have the finger ability that gives you a huge amount of dot, or versus the crabs in the Cove. There's a lot of enemies that put out very, very nasty dots, and this is a complete counter to those, which is great. And then finally, the third thing it does is it cures the Plague Doctor of a bleed or a blight. So you can cure 2 out of 4 of your characters using this of blights or bleeds, which is really good versus Shamblers, for example. And the other really nice part about this ability is it's on a character who's not normally a healer and who's very fast, which means that you can often save other characters that your healer might not get to in time by using battlefield med, which is pretty awesome. So like when the next round ticks over, let's say something bad happened, end of the round, an enemy crit your Jester, put him at 0 health and put a dot on him. Well, the Jester's almost always still going to go ahead of the healer because he's just that much faster than the healer that even with a Death's Door debuff on him, he's probably still faster than the healer. But the Jester with a Death's Door debuff on him is not faster than the Plague Doctor, which means the Plague Doctor will almost always go first in that scenario compared to the Jester and can cure the dot off the Jester before the Jester would have to deal with that Death's Door tick, which means you didn't have a chance to lose a character, which is just an awesome, awesome ability. All right, Emboldening Vapors is really bad. It gives a single target plus 5 speed and plus, or the speed scales up as the skill scales up. So it gives the single target plus speed and plus damage. The problem is action economy. A speed buff is good, but a camping speed buff is way, way, way better than an ability speed buff, especially on a character like the Plague Doctor who needs to spend the early rounds of a fight putting up plague grenades so that the back targets are dying. This is a kind of gimmick ability. It's most famous for a player whose name I don't remember right now, taking out the final boss of Darkest Dungeon without losing anybody by repeatedly emboldening Vapors, a leper, and one-shotting the actual heart, which is about the only use you'll get out of this ability, honestly. It's a gimmicky ability that really isn't necessary. He has many other better abilities to use. I can't think of many scenarios where this is useful. I suppose if you're in a position where the Plague Doctor can't do anything whatsoever and you don't care about healing for whatever reason, and you can't stun and you can't blight and you don't have this ability equipped, maybe you want to buff someone, but it seems like a pretty stupid position to be in with the Plague Doctor. Finally, there's Disorienting Blast. Disorienting Blast is a stun that can be used in any position that will stun the last 3 ranks, so rank 2, 3, 4 on the opponent's side. It does shuffle and clear corpses, and it has a fairly high stun percentage, and unlike the other Plague Doctor stun, unlike Blinding Gas, it can crit, so you can get stress healing off of it. I don't really like it quite as much, because most of the times the targets I want to stun are in position 3 or 4, and this is a better stun for that, but occasionally I will have it equipped if I'm in the Wields or the Warrens when I don't have my Blights equipped, so it could be useful then. It's okay. Something to note about the Plague Doctor. Actually, let's do camping skills, then we'll do that section. So let's go to the camping skills. Plague Doctor camping skills are nothing to be that excited about. Honestly, the reason why the Plague Doctor is as decent as they are the skills they have. The camping skills are fairly mediocre. Self-medicate is not real good. Time cost of 3, it gives you minus 10 stress, plus 10 accuracy, and heals for 20% HP, removing all blights and bleeds on you. I don't care about the healing element of it. The blight and bleed stuff is pretty not interesting to me since the Plague Doctor does it anyways. The 10 accuracy would be quite good. 10 accuracy and minus 10 stress would be okay for a cost of 3, except the Plague Doctor itemization is Blasphemous Vial, and Blasphemous Vial already gives you all the accuracy you need on the Plague Doctor, which means this is totally superfluous and not useful. The minus 10 stress is okay, but if we're just looking at minus 10 stress for a cost of 3, we're just better off encouraging from a different character. Cure is excellent. For 1 cost, you can remove disease and give yourself disease resist. That's great. Leeches is also excellent. It's one of 2 skills in the game that can remove a disease off of another character, so it's a very high value way of removing diseases before you're fighting a boss, if you caught a disease on the way to the boss, or if you're just bringing a character with diseases so you don't have to spend the money to cure them. This can be quite good too. Experimental Vapors, it seems like it could be decent, but I have not yet found very good uses for it. It's very expensive in terms of time cost. Time cost 4 is a lot. It heals for 50% HP, but I don't think camping is the time to be doing healing. You have healers for healing. Camping for healing really isn't enough. If you bring no healers and try to use camping for healing, you don't have enough healing, and if you bring healers, you don't need the camping healing. So it's kind of a catch-22 there. The only reason why you'd ever bother using this is if you had some need for one target to take a lot of plus healing. And I haven't really found that need yet, because most of the bosses are built around doing high stress or AoE damage or something else that makes it so you can't just focus a single target all the time. If you could find that need, you could maybe stack Experimental Vapors plus the Recovery Stone and give some character plus like 75% healing, like incoming healing or whatever it is. I can't remember if it's either 83 or it's 73. I can't remember if it's a 40 or 50 on Recovery Stone right now. Which would be a lot of increased healing, especially if you had another character who had plus healing. You could get a ton of extra healing, but I'm not sure that on a single character that's very necessary. So I haven't found a use for this. Maybe there is some use that is escaping me. It could be kind of neat, but it seems very expensive for what it does. All right, let's talk special restrictions on the Plague Doctor. The Plague Doctor's not religious, so she can go anywhere you want with anyone you want. That's not a big deal. She does have some restrictions though. She doesn't do very well in the Wield because everything's resistant to blight, and she doesn't do very well in the Warrens because everything's resistant to blight. And her other build is not as good as this build. She is much better using these 4 abilities than she is using these other abilities. And much worse for the Plague Doctor, quite honestly, is now the Crimson Court DLC. The Crimson Court DLC is really, really bad for the Plague Doctor. Because in the Crimson Court DLC, Crimson Court mobs, who are all very blight resistant, very, very blight resistant, and also some of whom are basically stun immune, are everywhere now. So even if you choose to go only to the runes of the Cove, which is where the Plague Doctor is very strong, you still will encounter a fair percentage of fights where you are fighting Crimson Court mobs, to which the Plague Doctor is totally useless against with this build. So your options then are don't bring Plague Doctors, or bring the Plague Doctor with a build that is versatile enough that it can fight the Crimson Court mods, which basically is Incision, which is bad. Or you do some sort of hybrid build, in which case you're dropping your better skills for things like this. This is probably what I will run on Plague Doctors. Or you just acknowledge that the Plague Doctor is less good than they were before, which is kind of the route I'm also taking. Which is, whereas prior to this expansion, I would say the Plague Doctor was one of the best characters in the game, I now will put them down to average, just because the number of fights in which you can't use the bulk of their good abilities is quite high now, which is fairly frustrating. So... all right, so hopefully this has been somewhat engaging and informative, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.